in association with Combat Sports Collective, clothing for those who love combat sports. You're listening to Straight to the Point, Uncut. Hello and welcome to the latest edition of Straight to the Point, Uncut. I'm your host, Kieran Gibbons. Please subscribe to the podcast on YouTube. You can also follow us on Twitter at STTP Uncut. And you can also like our Facebook page. Today, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Gerrard Williams, who's a reporter, an author, a broadcaster, and a filmmaker. And I'm sure plenty of other things as well that I haven't added on. Viewers and listeners to the podcast will know the subject that we're going to talk about. And some may raise a skeptical eye. But the first thing I want to do before we get on with the subject is I just want to establish Gerard's credentials, because Gerard is not what you would call your average conspiracy theorist, if that's the right term. Gerard has been a serious journalist for the best part of 40 years and worked on some of the biggest trouble spots in the world. So Gerard, can you just tell us a little bit about your professional background?
Hi, Kieran. Nice to be talking to a fellow Welshman. Right, well, I've been a journalist since I was 19, did my A-levels in Cardiff and my journalism college in Cardiff, then went to London to work for the world's largest television news agency. And I worked in international news for, well, pretty much 40 years. I'm old. So I've worked for Reuters Television, the world's largest TV news agency. I've worked for their competitors, Associated Press. I'm a former foreign duty editor at the BBC, former foreign duty editor at Sky TV News. I worked for Australian Associated Press and the ABC in Australia. I ran a program called Africa Journal in Nairobi. I was managing editor there. I've spent some time in business news as well, in the city, in London, and covered the fall of the Soviet Union on the ground, both Gulf Wars in Baghdad, post-Gulf War I and Gulf War II, 2.5 years in Yugoslavia during the troubles there, working mainly out of Serbia, on the Serbian side of the conflict. The last major international story I did was the tsunami in 2004 for Sky. And I was not only on the desk the night it happened, but I was in Sri Lanka 12 hours later running Sky's coverage on the island. And one of the worst natural disasters I'd ever seen. My first foreign trips, I went to Australia to work. And then at 23, I did documentaries on the famines in the Horn of Africa. Some of your viewers may be old enough to remember Live Aid. Well, I did some of the coverage that sparked that in Ethiopia and Sudan. So I've been around. I've worked in over 100 countries. And yeah, I mean, for a comprehensive schoolboy from Cardiff, I've had an interesting life.
Yeah, certainly have. Right, okay, let's get straight to the point of the subject I've got you on the show to talk about. If you read any history books, whether as a schoolboy or in university, they all tell you that on the 30th of April, 1945, Adolf Hitler killed himself in his bunker in Berlin with the Red Army closing in on him. But you don't think that's what happened? You think Hitler survived the war?
Kieran, I know that's not what happened. Just a quick bit of background. I was in Argentina doing a bunch of other stories for Al Jazeera, for Channel 4 News on the Falklands Malvinas veterans. I'm old enough to remember the Falklands War, almost went, but covered it from London as a young reporter. And I loved Argentina. I just thought, God, this brilliant country. I'd never been here before. And I was having such a good time. You know, it's beautiful. The food's great. The wine's great. The people are really friendly and nice. As long as I told them I was Welsh and not English, because they still have a big thing about the Malvinas. And I came across this story chatting away to one of my interpreters. Adolf Hitler had lived in Argentina after the war. And I just laughed. I just said, oh, this is crazy, stupid stuff. And she said, no, you ask anybody around here, they'll all tell you that Adolf Hitler lived in Argentina and came here by a submarine. And I thought, great, after it was then about 30 years of doing hard news stories, I thought, I'm going to do a silly story. I'm going to do a conspiracy story that Adolf Hitler escaped from Berlin, got on a submarine and went to Argentina, where he lived his life until whenever. So I wanted to use it as an excuse to go back to Argentina, basically, and see some more of the country. And so I came back to the UK and I started looking into it. And I thought, this is going to be dead easy. Hitler's dead anyway, you know, who cares? And then it started to be a bit more serious, because I went back and looked at all the contemporary reporting from the BBC, from AP, from Newsweek, from Time, from Reuters, and none of them were reporting Adolf Hitler as being definitely dead in the bunker. Stalin had said to one of Eisenhower's aides, or Truman's aides, I think at that stage Eisenhower wasn't president, he was still in charge of the military in Europe, but said to one of Truman's aides that Hitler had escaped to Spain or Argentina. The Newsweek correspondent on the ground with the Soviet troops, embedded, as we'd call it now, was shown the escape tunnel by the officer in charge on the ground. The escape tunnel in the Chancellery building, which led down to the underground, which enabled Hitler to get out to the place where the aircraft picked him up and flew him out of Berlin. And then I found reports from a pilot, Captain Peter Baumgart, who said that he had been that pilot who had flown Hitler, Eva Braun, and various other people out of Berlin to Tonda in Denmark, where he left them and they were picked up by another aeroplane. We then had Hitler's personal pilot saying that he had been at a base in Norway where he had waved people off and he wouldn't say any more about it. And then in Argentina, there was eyewitness after eyewitness after eyewitness who said they had seen Hitler in Argentina post-war. So I started to take this a little more seriously. I'm thinking, this is wrong. This can't be right. I mean, everything I've ever learned, you know, everything I know says that Hitler's dead in the bunker in Berlin. But everything I began to learn showed me that there was a completely different story and that we had been lied to extensively. Adolf Hitler did get out of the bunker with Eva Braun. The Russians never admitted to finding either Hitler's corpse or Eva Braun's corpse until much, much later. They found 6 doubles, 6 dead doppelgangers of Hitler in the Chancellery and in the bunker area, but they never found a body that could actually be Adolf Hitler. And there's a great report from the BBC's Thomas Cadet, who's on site embedded with the Soviet troops there at the same time. And Cadet makes it very clear that the Soviet forces have not found any body that they can say is Hitler. They have found numerous bodies that they thought might have been Hitler, but wasn't. And Marshal Zhukov, who was commander of Soviet forces in Berlin, said he'd escaped. He was very final about it. Up until 1955, Eisenhower, who'd commanded Allied forces, said, we hope he's dead, but we've got no proof that he is. So when you come, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, right? I mean, I've never done a conspiracy theory story in my life. I'm a hack. You know, I'm a journalist, proper old-fashioned journalist. I'm not a Fleet Street hack either. You know, I'm an international hack. And I've always worked for people who've never had a political agenda. Although you might say Sky News had a political agenda, it doesn't. Sky News is the cleanest news operation I've ever worked for. The BBC is much more of a political agenda than Sky. So I've never had to write or produce or do anything to satisfy an owner or a publisher. I've been able to write as an agency journalist. And what I've discovered as an agency journalist has blown my mind. Not just that Hitler survived. It's how the Nazis survived after World War II is the really scary thing. And
just to follow up on what you said there, I mean, I follow you on Facebook. I find your posts very interesting about world affairs and politics. And you're quite a cynical guy. You look at things in a certain way, and you're definitely not what you would call a conspiracy theorist, just to back up what you said there.
I'm a trained cynic, Kieran. I've been doing this a long time, mate, a long time. You know, you don't deal with Bosnian bloody warlords and Tutu murderers and, you know, the ANC and Russian troops and everybody else without being cynical about what people's motives are.
So what was the one bit of evidence then when you started to investigate this that made you change your mind from thinking that this was going to be bit of a, you know, a silly story to thinking, wow, this I could be onto something here?
The fascinating thing for me is there is no single piece. There are dozens of pieces, all of which say things which are completely not in line with the official story of Hitler's death in the bunker. It was the overwhelming mass of evidence that really shook me. I mean, I was thinking, why isn't any of this mentioned by historians? Why do they all just accept this man, Hugh Trevor Roper, who wrote The Last Days of Adolf Hitler? Why do they accept Trevor Roper's story? So I looked at Trevor Roper's story, you know, because I like to go back to the original source on material, which historians don't. They go back to peer-reviewed historians. They're very lazy people, historians. They're not trained like me. Or people like me. Sorry, I don't want to sound arrogant, but it's true. So, yeah, I went back and looked at Trevor Roper's material. He said that he'd interviewed a number of people in his book. Hannah Reich, Hitler's favorite female pilot, one of Hitler's aides-de-camps. He'd never interviewed Hannah Reich. He was given access to Hannah Reich's interviews that the Americans had recorded because Reich was an American prisoner, and they wouldn't let Trevor Roper near her. The aide-de-camp said that every time he looked back at what Trevor Roper had written in later years, he used to laugh because he'd made it up. Now, this man is the man who everything comes from, basically. One man, he was a professor of medieval history before the war. He'd written a book about, I think, Thomas Cranmer, one of the archbishops of, you know, the Henry VIII time. During the war, he'd been a desk operative in intelligence, and yet he was chosen to be the man to investigate the death of Adolf Hitler. So nobody from Scotland Yard's there, nobody with any detective background, nobody with any forensic background. The Americans don't put in a senior FBI operative or, you know, the chief of the New York police, somebody with some credentials. The British government put in a man who is a medieval history scholar, who is part of the establishment and will do as he's damn well told. And that's what he did. He did as he was told. The Brits and the Americans, to a lesser extent, but the Brits definitely needed Hitler dead. They needed a final end to World War II. It had cost Britain the empire. It had cost Britain a huge amount economically. And they just needed it to be over. And so they got this dupe. A quick side story, my best buddy from school, right? It's an architect in Wales, and a very famous architect in Wales, so I'm not going to name him, but his dad was professor of medieval history at Oxford at the same time as Hugh Trevor Roper was a professor at Oxford. So my mate's dad was a lovely man. I got on extremely well with him. Unfortunately, he died before I wrote Grey Wolf, but his wife hadn't. So I went to see her because I always went to see her when I went back to see my mate. And I asked her if she knew who Trevor Roper, and she said, "Oh God, awful man, Gerard, awful man." Said, "Just did it for the money." So to me, you know, you start to look at the people who are credited with the real story, and they're very, very dubious. And then you look at all the reporters, the BBC correspondent, the Newsweek correspondent, the AP correspondents, the Reuters correspondents, guys who, you know, you don't just get stuff on the wire. You have to do it properly. You have to source it. You have to make sure it's right. And then your sub-editor makes sure it's right. And somebody decides to publish it. All these guys, I do not believe Trevor Roper's version because it's wrong.
So where did the motivation for this cover-up, if you want to call it that, come from?
A deal was done, basically, between Martin Bormann, who in 1945 is the most important man in the Reich. In fact, from 1943 on, he's dismissed in history as Hitler's secretary. He's secretary of the Nazi Party. He's the most politically powerful man. He's more powerful than Hitler. I mean, he runs all the Gauleiters, all the local councils. He's very close to the head of the SS, Gestapo Müller. And more importantly, he's very close to General Wolf in Italy, who's head of the SS and Gestapo in Italy at the end of the war. Bormann does a deal with an American OSS operative called Alan Dulles. And he says, basically, if you let Hitler, myself, and a few other key people escape, we will give you the whole of our rocket teams, we'll give you all our nuclear weapons material, we'll give you everything that we're willing to give you that we nicked from Europe, which is all the treasures found at Mecca's mine and a few other places. And that's the deal. You get all this, or the Russians get it. Dulles, who'd been a lawyer in Berlin before the war for American corporations like Chase Manhattan and the Ford Motor Company and Coca-Cola, all these wonderful people who were very close to the Nazis as they built up. Dulles knew Bormann from before the war. He was the OSS head of office in Switzerland, and he did a deal. And he did a deal which eventually led not just to America being on the moon with Werner von Braun as head of NASA, but also ridiculously to things like the birth of rock and roll. The Germans actually invented multi-track recording. The Nazis did. And they were using it in propaganda in the 40s. And that technology went to America, and we got Elvis. But a deal was done. And
so the Russians, or the Soviets as they were then, they weren't privy to this information?
No, completely not. I mean, by the end of 1944, there was a big movement within America, especially, that the next great threat was the Soviets.
Sorry, Gerard. There's a bit of it sound interference there. Is there something?
Sorry, that the next great threat was the Soviets. Is that clearer?
Yeah, it's better. Yeah, thanks, Matt.
Yeah, sorry, I'm working off my computer mic.
Yeah.
And as such, they were planning for the next war. And it would have been the very handy thing to have the Germans on their side for the next war. I mean, General Patton, for instance, Patton took the surrender of a huge number of German troops, including SS divisions. Patton allowed them to keep their sidearms, stack their weapons, and was just waiting for the opportunity to throw his troops along with the Nazis against the Russians. I mean, communism was a huge perceived threat by everybody from the Vatican to the American government. And of course, the great war leader, Roosevelt, was dead by the time the Nazis surrendered. Truman was pretty, he hadn't been briefed. Roosevelt didn't even like him very much. So we had this vice president who became president, who didn't know what the hell was going on. And so people like Alan Dulles and his brother, and their contacts within industry in America, especially, what became known as Eisenhower and Kennedy both described it as the military-industrial complex. They saw this as a huge opportunity to get all the good stuff. And so they did. And in doing so, they let quite a few senior Nazis escape, and quite a few senior Nazis to remain in post in Germany and Austria, West Germany as it was, because the Soviets controlled half of it. But the idea of denazification in West Germany and Austria is just nonsense. There was no denazification. These sons of bitches went home, took off their Hugo Boss designed uniforms and put on their Hugo Boss designed suits and went back to work. So
was Winston Churchill in on this?
I don't think so. There are people within Churchill's government who definitely knew. And I mean, Churchill is pretty much a spent force in 45. People like my dad are coming back from the Middle East and Italy and voting him out of office because, they wanted a proper socialist government with a healthcare system designed by Nye Bevan, great Welshman. So Churchill is pretty much a spent force. And, Churchill had to agree effectively to give away the British Empire and let America become the dominant international force in the world. But there are people definitely within the secret services. Ian Fleming is one of them. I mean, everybody just thinks Ian Fleming is the creator of Bond. Fleming is probably the most important intelligence operative of the end of World War II. He has a unit called 30th Assault Unit, a bunch of commandos known as Fleming's Red Indians. And these are the boys who go in behind enemy lines at the end of the war, as the war is still carrying on. They go to the homes of all these scientists, and they go to the places where the nuclear material is stored, and they go and get the whole of the Kriegsmarine's records, including all their submarine plans and everything else. And they do this as war is still continuing. So the idea that Werner von Braun and his brother just surrendered in Bavaria to Patton's troops is rubbish. They were delivered to Patton's troops by Ian Fleming's commandos, 30th Assault Unit. Now, they knew exactly where to go. They knew where Werner von Braun's team lived, their home addresses. They were able to travel with impunity through Nazi-occupied Germany to pick these people up and take them out. Yeah, I've seen combat, and I've seen the fog of war, as they call it. You haven't got a clue what's going on. Somebody had to tell these boys where to go and who to pick up. And the only people who could have done that were the senior members of the Nazi Party, still in power.
So what evidence is there, or what sources you refer to?
There's now a great deal of material from 30th Assault Unit, which has been released. There's a great deal which is still stamped for another 100 years. I have CIA, FBI documentation, which covers everything I've said. I mean, I don't make anything up. Everything has to have a source. Material from interviews with key players, not done by me necessarily, but interviews done with key players post-war. A huge amount of information out of Argentina and Paraguay, especially, from eyewitnesses to things that happened post-war. I also had access to a man called Otto Scorseni, who was Hitler's favorite commander. Scorseni did the raid that got Mussolini out.
Yeah.
Scarface, he was known as the most dangerous man in Europe. Well, Scorseni left a treasure trove of documents, 900 pages of written material, plus over 1,000 pages of other material, including classified documentation from the CIA, OSS, and then the CIA, because OSS became CIA. Documentation from Argentina, from his time working with the Perons, Juan Domingo Perón, the Nazi-installed dictator of Argentina. And I have access to all of Colonel Scorseni's material, including, I don't know, 7 or 8 fake passports, all in different names. Material from Der Spiegel, which is the German news magazine, which enables me to match up with what Scorseni has said in his writings with material that was reported at the time. The personal letters of a man called Hans Ulrich Rudel, who's Hitler's favorite Stuka pilot, the guy knocked out 600 Soviet tanks, had the highest rank, highest medal ever made for a Nazi soldier. And after the war, Rudel went on to run the fascist organization internationally and tried to bring the Reich Party back to power in Germany. He failed, but he did try a coup, which the British stopped in the 50s. It's just not the story we were told, you know, Kieran. I mean, my dad, who was, 8th Army, so dad joined up in 39 at 18, lied about his age, idiot, fought up through North Africa, then up through Italy, was wounded badly at Monte Cassino, and not, life-threateningly, but badly. My dad, if he'd known what I've discovered, he'd have picked up his Lee Enfield, or probably his Thompson, because he was a qualified submachine gun instructor, and wanted to kill people. I mean, he would have been just so shocked at how betrayed his generation were. And I'm still shocked and angry by it.
So from the evidence you've gathered and the sources you've referred to, I mean, how did Hitler actually escape from Berlin? And at what point does your version of history, if you want to put it that way, deviate from the more common view of what happened?
Okay, two people did die in the bunker, but they weren't Hitler and Eva. So they were doubles. Hitler had used a double regularly. And in Grey Wolf, The Escape of Adolf Hitler, the book Simon Dunson, my historian friend, and I wrote, we had a medical physician, a physics expert, prove that the last pictures of Hitler giving out medals to the Hitler Youth.
Yeah, I know the picture.
Yeah, well, it's supposed to be April 20th, 1945, right? It's actually shot on March the 20th, 1945, because those pictures appear in the last Hitler Youth magazine, which is published on April 20th, 1945. But historians always get this wrong. That's not Hitler giving out the medals. It's a double. Yeah, and this is 20th century, well, 21st century technology, which is, stands up in a court of law, which shows us that man is not Adolf Hitler. So, and we know from various other scientific tests that we've done that Hitler, this stand-in was there at various stages. Post the July 44 bomb plot, the Stauffenberg plot as it's become known as, the man visiting people in hospital the day after isn't Hitler. It's a double. It's not the same double who's giving out the medals, funnily enough, but it is a double. And, there's also material that was done before I wrote Grey Wolf by a scientist called Dr. Benetoni, who went to Russia, tested the skull that the Soviets had since 45, and they've always said, this is Adolf Hitler's skull, there's a bullet hole in it. It's not, it's that of a 40-year-old woman. It's done by DNA testing. You can't scrap DNA testing. So there's no proof Hitler's dead in the bunker at all. He flies out of Berlin, he flies to Denmark, he flies on to Norway, picks up another plane.
So, sorry, Gerard, to interrupt you. So he's in the bunker at some point, I presume.
Yeah.
And how does he go? I presume he moves. He moves west through the Western lines.
No, he leaves the bunker, walks over to the Chancellery, to his own office in the Chancellery. There is a concrete door that slides open in the Chancellery, which leads down to an underground bunker, which then leads further down into the underground railway system in Berlin, the U-Bahn. They walk about a couple of miles along the U-Bahn to a place called the Hohenzollern-Damm, which is a big, wide road in Berlin, still there today. And waiting there for them is a Ju-52, a Tante Ju, captained by Captain Peter Baumgart.
So this the pilot, Captain Peter Baumgart. What's he on record as saying? I mean, what statements is he given on this?
He's saying that he was waiting there on the Hohenzollern-Damm, flew Hitler over, General Romer, I think Fagelin as well, out to Tonder in Denmark, where on the ground at Tonder in Denmark, we have an SS officer's eyewitness report of Hitler being there and landing in that plane. And Baumgart says all this in a Polish court post-World War II, where he's accused of being another Baumgart who'd been a guard at Auschwitz. And he gets put away for 5 years for being a member of the SS. He is then released and he's taken by the Americans to New York. I thought he disappeared from history, but a really good researcher called Peter David Orr. Peter found his route details and where he arrived in New York, how he'd been flown out of the American, So the Americans took this pilot and he then went on to, live in America. His son flew jets in Vietnam, actually, for the Americans. His son was a pilot too.
I presume he's had pretty much since he's been in America, he hasn't spoken about his involvement in Hitler's escape.
No, he didn't. Not post-war. He did at the Polish court. The judge sent him away for 3 months while they had him interviewed by psychiatrists and everything else. The psychiatrist came back and said, what he says he thinks is true. So he wasn't dismissed as a nutter. And this is all reported by the Press Association, it's published in British papers, and American papers, and Australian papers, and historians ignore it completely. I wish they wouldn't. If they can dismiss it, brilliant. They can go up against any single piece of evidence I present and say, no, Baumgart's a known alcoholic who was on cocaine at the time, and his homosexual lover threatened him, whatever. I mean, prove me wrong.
So Hitler flies out of Berlin. Where does he go to, Gerard?
He goes to Tonda in Denmark. There are still 400,000 Nazi combat troops on the ground in Denmark. Nobody's surrendered. Flies into an airfield there. It actually used to be a Zeppelin airfield in World War I. And from there, he flies to Travemünde. From Travemünde, he boards a Ju-252, which is a long-distance plane. That flies down to an airfield called Reus, just outside of Barcelona. It's about 60 clicks outside of Barcelona, where he boards a Spanish Air Force Ju-52, which flies him to Fuerteventura on the Canary Islands, sorry. It's a place called Villa Winter, but there's a huge airfield on the Jandia province, the Jandia Peninsula, which was built by the Nazis in the 40s to take long-range aircraft. But he then boards a submarine off the coast of Fuerteventura. It's 3 submarines from the last U-boat pack of World War II, interestingly enough, called Seawolf. And he arrives in Argentina probably 53 days later. They take it slowly.
So are there sources, and have you evidence and witnesses to corroborate all this?
I have witnesses to most of this. There are gaps. I'll give you that. There are gaps. I'm not completely sure which submarine he boarded. I'm pretty confident of which submarine he boarded. And then we have reports of landings on the coast in Argentina from the Coast Guard, from the Navy in Argentina, from the police in Argentina. We then have people in the first houses they stayed in Bariloche who gave interviews. In fact, I went with a film crew to the Estancia San Ramon and saw the house where Hitler had been in. But just prior to that, an Argentine TV crew had been, and they'd been asked by a woman, "Why are you filming here?" And they said, "Oh, we're filming the house Hitler lived in." She said, "Well, there's no point filming that when he lived over there."
Yeah.
It's like that all the time in Argentina. I mean, it's ridiculous.
So why wouldn't the Soviets, who, why would they play along with this?
They didn't play along with it. I mean, we're talking the Cold War. Yeah, I mean, within a couple of years of the end of the war, there's the Berlin Airlift. You know, we've still got hundreds of thousands of combat troops in Europe, the Americans and the Brits. I mean, my sister was one. You know, my sister was a major in the WRAC in the British Army of the Rhine in the 70s. You know, even in the 70s. There is complete and total distrust because not only is the space race happening, but the atomic weapons race is happening. So, and the Soviets are too busy rebuilding their country. I mean, it's a bloody mess. You know, the Germans shattered it. So they're much more interested in the hot aspects of the Cold War than they are in chasing a bunch of Nazis. And what's interesting for me as well, Kieran, is Martin Bormann, who is key to all of this, and Bormann escapes too. That's a really long story to go into. Bormann's body is never found. Whatever the West German government say, they're a bunch of liars. And I can prove they're a bunch of liars. Scientifically, I can prove they're a bunch of liars. Bormann is tried in absentia at Nuremberg and is found guilty of crimes against humanity. But they haven't got his body. Hitler is not tried at Nuremberg in absentia, but they don't have Hitler's body. There is no confirmation they have Hitler's body. Stalin says, you don't have his body, he's escaped to Spain or Argentina. Eisenhower's saying, well, we've never seen his body. I mean, you know, the BBC reporters are going, what, doubles? And yet at Nuremberg, Hitler is never charged with anything.
So why would the Soviets try and help the West in keeping the lie going or the myth going that Hitler died?
Well, they had a completely different myth. You know, the Russians' approach to all this, you know, that supposedly they dug up the bones of everybody and then they ground them into paste and then threw them in a river in East Germany. And one report was put on Stalin's desk and another was put on Beria, his head of security's desk. None of it works. None of it fits. You know, the eyewitnesses the Russians had, and they captured quite a lot of them, their stories sound like a piece from a play. They were all told, or they all believed what they had seen. But when you look at their stories in detail, they all change. And when some of them were released, there's one guy, who's it, Linger or
Heinz Linger from the
yeah,
Hitler's Valley.
Yeah, it's either Linger or
Otto Gunscher.
Yeah, I think it's Gunscher.
Axman. Right. I think Axman was one of the three.
Axman allegedly saw Bormann die, but Axman standing next to Hitler, giving out the medals to the Hitler Youth. So I wouldn't believe anything that Nazi pig had to say. They were running a script. But Gunscher, after the war, appears on the BBC. He's trying to flog a book. I was Hitler's friend or something, in the 50s. Appears on the BBC in Town Tonight. And he says, no, we never saw the body. I think they're buried in a big cemetery somewhere, but I don't know anything about petrol being poured over them. Yeah, well, that's what Trevor Roper says he saw, and that's what the Soviets said he saw. But no, he says on the BBC, I have no idea what you're talking about, mate. I told the Russians anything they wanted to hear.
So for the three witnesses who said they saw Hitler and Eva Braun's body in the bunker, that was all made up.
They never said they saw their bodies. They said they saw bodies covered by a blanket. And one of them was wearing a dress they thought was Eva Braun's. Yeah, there's this guy who made a fortune out of he was a telephone operator, Rokas Misch, always described as Hitler's bodyguard. Yes, he was part of the Leibstand of Adolf Hitler. He ran the telephone exchange there. Now, Misch said he heard the shot, but then Misch said he didn't hear the shot, but then Misch said he heard the shot again. And then somebody did a really clever computer animation of the bunker and showed that with the U-boat engine running, which it was constantly to give power to the bunker, supplied all the electricity and all the water pumping and everything else, and with the way in which the 5-foot thick walls were, you could not hear the shot from Hitler's office or Hitler's bedroom. So Rokas Misch lied as well. I mean, his testimony is just not secure. And what you have to remember, all of these guys are oath-bound Nazis. They swore to give their lives for Adolf Hitler, not for the Nazi Party, not for Germany, for Adolf Hitler. And they just kept to the script. And I think they actually believed that what they were shown was what they saw. But it's a very clever sleight of hand. Those bodies aren't Hitler and Eva.
So how many people of the top Nazis do you think actually knew or were part of the plan for Hitler to escape?
It's pretty small. It's Martin Bormann, it's Heinrich Müller, head of Gestapo SS, and it's General Fegelein, Eva Braun's brother-in-law. They're the three key people in the bunker who know about it. And there's a small SS unit that accompanies him to the Hohenzollern, where he picks up the aircraft. And they would have known that it was the Fuhrer and Eva Braun that they were giving their life for. But the rest of them, no, they were all shown something, and they believed that what they were shown was the truth. But Martin Bormann's a very clever man. He'd already brought doubles into the bunker, and they swapped them out.
So Hitler's will and testament, that was all part of the cover-up as well? Yeah,
and the marriage. When his will and testament are sent out, and it's Operation Seraglio, and they about eight aircraft flee Berlin, his favorite aide-de-camp dies when one is shot down. It's Hitler's last will and testament, I think. I just don't think the signatures are Hitler's. I think that he did get these things out, but he was gone or was going as they went. And he had lots of different options, lots of different places that he could go and different routes they could use. I mean, they multi-routed everything.
According to traditional history, if you have to call it, Hitler was in a very poor state of mind and very poor health at this point. I mean, was that the case according to your research?
No, he's 56, he's pretty knackered. He is taking some strange drugs, although not as many as Morel said. But in those days, I mean, there's always things about, he was taking cocaine. in those days, cocaine and heroin were part of a lot of drugs that people used, given up by doctors. Not today, sadly. Well, not sadly, but we use cocaine, so I wouldn't know. So he's 56, he's tired, he's had a pretty rough war. He's not completely recovered from the July 44 bomb plot, which hurt him a lot more than he ever made on, or the Nazis ever made out that it did. His life he would have died if the Allies hadn't given him early antibiotics to save his life. And they came from Alan Dulles via Bormann. But he's not the mess people say he is. I mean, there's all this stuff about Hitler, which is Allied propaganda. Again, there's, Hitler only had one ball. He may well have been monotesticular, but, I don't think there's any real proof that Hitler had one ball, but it makes a great song. Then there's a wonderful, I think, somebody in Web piece, if you look it up, Hitler only one ball, about a jokey propaganda way of that song being created. It's much closer to the truth than the real story. They say Hitler's a vegetarian. He isn't. He doesn't eat a lot of meat, but his favorite meal is baby pigeon. Poussin, basically, like a baby chicken, but a baby pigeon. And he loved liver sausage. This doesn't come from me making it up. This comes from his chef in his book. Hitler ate a lot of vegetarian stuff. He hated smoking, and that's true. He wasn't teetotal, but he only ever had one glass. At a reception or something, he'd have half a glass of champagne. I mean, people do this. Not everybody's Winston Churchill or me in my old days, younger days. But there's also this thing, they describe Hitler as a carpet muncher. So the carpet munching lunatic. He's a lunatic, but carpet munching is a German phrase for walking up and down across the room while you're thinking, literally eating the carpet. But no, this turns into a really handy English phrase for Hitler's a carpet-eating lunatic, vegetarian, teetotal, who's only got one ball. I mean, if that isn't propaganda, I don't know what is propaganda.
So did your research find out what Hitler's intention was once he got to Argentina? Was he hoping to get...
Yeah, I mean, Hitler becomes sidelined pretty quickly after they get to Argentina. And by about 53, 54, when the Perón government falls and the Nazis have a bit of a problem, they thought everything was fine, but it actually stays pretty fine, but it's not as fine as it was. Martin Bormann has realized by that stage, because all the material about the Holocaust has started to come out properly. And it's only really 46, 47 that all the film from Auschwitz and Birkenau and Belsen and all that stuff comes out, and people start to count up how many people are dead and how industrially it's done. And it's at that stage where the Nazi Party brand is gone forever. No longer can you march blood legions behind a bloody swastika in your jackboots, singing the Horst Wessel. All that's gone. The black uniforms, all that's gone. There's no way that anybody will follow that again. Nobody will ever follow Hitler again. He's responsible for the deaths. In 1947, they're saying 6 million Jews, right? But in reality, that's close to 13 million people the Nazis murdered industrially. Stalin murdered, probably lots more, but he didn't do it industrially in the way they did. He just sent them all to the gulags and they all died out there. Not a nice man. But by sort of 55, that whole Nazi branding is dead and gone. Nobody will ever follow it again. But Martin Bormann, who'd arranged for patents and huge amounts of money and everything else to be shipped out of Germany between 1943 and 1945. And we're not talking barrow loads of gold teeth from the camps, right? We're talking billions of dollars in telegraphic transfer via the Swiss banks, who took their 6% and shifted it to Argentina.
Is there any evidence of this transfer of money?
Yep, there's massive evidence for the transfer of money and for patents and everything else. And there's actually a case at the moment, Kieran, where descendants of a man called Rudolf Freude, who was the Nazi ambassador effectively in Argentina and one of Perón's right-hand men. Credit Suisse had just discovered in the last 3 years an account with 35 billion euros in it. And Freuder's family, it's in Freuder's name, and Freuder's family are trying to get it at the moment. There's a huge legal battle going on in Argentina. I haven't seen it reported once in the UK press, not once. But yep, Credit Suisse is saying, well, we've got this 35 billion euros. Obviously, it's had interest gathering. We've looked after the money for you guys. And that's been languishing there since 45. It's a tiny percentage of the amount the Nazis took out. They raped Europe. They took the gold from every single central bank that they took over. Every single victim of theirs in a concentration camp had to sign over their shares, their insurance policies, their bank accounts before they were put in. The Nazis were thorough. I mean, all the art that they stole. I mean, and then 2/3 of that they found after the war. 1/3 of it is still the biggest heist in history. It's still out there.
So what was Hitler's life like in Argentina from the evidence you found? Because then just could you tell us as well, in how long did you spend in Argentina researching this?
I've been to Argentina 18 times, Kieran. I mean, I must have done, I don't know, 70 weeks on the ground in various parts of Argentina. It's a lovely country, and they do like the Welsh there. It's the only Welsh colony in the world in Argentina.
Yeah, Patagonia,
yeah, down in Trelew. It's very strange, very strange. And I don't speak. I did Welsh in school for 7 years, and did Earth and all that stuff. But I don't speak Welsh as well as they do. Very weird. Anyway, Hitler's life in Argentina. He lives in from about 46-7 on, they live in a beautiful house called Inalco until 53, 54, which is on one of the most beautiful lakes in the world, Nahuel Huapi, which is at the foothill of the Andes. About 50 miles, maybe 50 miles from San Carlos de Bariloche, which I always refer to as Nazi Central because so many bloody SS ended up there after the war. And Bormann comes out in 48, and I think they have a pretty straightforward conversation in 48. And Bormann takes over the running of the party. I mean, according to various witnesses, Ava and the 2 daughters are with him until 51, 52, then Ava leaves him.
So, Hitler had 2 children?
Yeah, one born in Germany in about 38. And there's detailed material about Ava Braun giving birth to a child in 38, which is all in Grey Wolf. Then she is reportedly told Hitler in the bunker in March 45 that she's pregnant with his child. It's her last gift to him. And she gives birth in Argentina later that year, August time.
So are these children, have you any idea where these children are now? Or they'd obviously be...
I haven't made it my business to chase down the kids, I must admit. One of them, I'm pretty sure, died in a car crash in the 60s. The other one was still alive, as was Ava, until about 2003 in Buenos Aires. I mean, I have the testimony of one of Argentina's leading human rights lawyers, who was a young divorce lawyer, was giving divorce counseling to Ursula Hitler, Uschi, and who told her all about her parents and how they lived after the war and why her mum had left. And this is a woman who has appeared on the international stage as a human rights lawyer. Why would she lie to me?
And what's her name? Could you tell us?
I can't off the top of my head now, but it's in the book.
Okay.
And you can Google her. You can find her online. And she worked a lot with Estela de Carlota, who's the woman the grandmother of the murdered people of the Plaza de Mayo that disappeared in Argentina in the 70s. I can't remember the lawyer's name. I'm sorry, Kieran. My brain is full of a lot of stuff, but it'll come up just as we go off there. I'll go, bugger, that's it.
So is it widely believed amongst most Argentinian people that Hitler did escape to Argentina? Is that the general opinion, or is it?
Yep, pretty much. I mean, let me give you a couple of great examples, okay? How silly it is when you're out there. I'm up in Cordoba and about to go to a really wacky old hotel, Hotel Vienna, built by the Nazis towards the end of the war, never really used. It's half hospital, half luxury hotel, destroyed by an inland tsunami in the 60s, and it's on a lake. And the lake is one of the largest lakes in the world. It's actually tidal, this lake. It's called the Mar Chiquita, the Little Sea. So I'm in a hotel in Cordoba with my wonderful translator, and we're checking out. And there's a girl behind the desk in her 20s. And Mary Jenny, my translator, says, could you tell us the easiest way to get up to where Hotel Vienna is? And she said, oh, yeah, you take the 852 up to there, and then you turn left up to Nettley, and all that stuff. I'm following bits of this. And then she says, you must eat the fish up there. They do the best fish and chips in little restaurants around near the old hotel. And she said the fish have no bones in them. They're dinosaur fish, because the lake has been there since dinosaur times. And said, and after lunch, you should go and have a look at the hotel where Hitler and Ava used to stay after the war. So she has no idea why I'm there. Mary Eugenia has not mentioned the word Hitler. And this 22-year-old is saying to us, oh yeah, go and see the hotel where Hitler and Ava used to stay after the war.
Did you find any physical evidence of Hitler being in Argentina?
There are photos, and I haven't seen them, but I know there are photos there because one of my witnesses said she had photos, and then she wouldn't talk to us again because she got a phone call saying, don't deal with those bloody English people. If you say any more, we'll kill you. We reported this to the Argentine police, the hate crimes unit. And last time I was in Bariloche with the Hunting Hitler team, we were on the lake at Nahuel Huapi to have a look at the Saracen Tower, which is one of the guard towers on the approach to Inalco, the house. And I'm there with a lawyer who's a local historian as well. He's got two things in his hands, which he's showing me. And one is an autobiography of Hans Ulrich Rudel, Hitler's favorite Stuka pilot, 600 Soviet tanks, loses a leg, goes to Argentina post-war, close friend of Perón, skis around Bariloche with him, spends a lot of time around Bariloche, and then goes back to Germany to try and restart the Nazi party. And it's Hans Ulrich Rudel's autobiography, called Broken Swastika, I think, or Swastika Down or something. And in the front is written, to my dear comrade, with all best regards, Hans Ulrich Rudel, 1949. And I say to the lawyer, yeah, I've seen this. I've got a version in English, which has the foreword from Douglas Bader. Can you believe that? The legless RAF ace, who was a close friend of Oswald Mosley, the British Union of Fascists, who published Rudel's biography in English in Britain after the war. And Bader did the foreword. Nice one. And he said, yeah, he said, I said, where'd you get this? He said, well, one of my clients has a lot of stuff left from her father, who was a senior Nazi who lived here after the war. And I said, oh, yeah. I said, lots of them around, weren't they? He said, yeah, lots and lots. And he handed me a little cloth bag and he said, have a look at that. And so I look at the cloth bag and I open it up, and inside there's an iron cross. But it's not a Second World War iron cross. I've seen dozens of World War II iron crosses in Argentina, dozens of Nazi mothers labeled medals. It's a World War I iron cross from the 1418 war. And I said, okay, so World War I iron cross, no names on it. They didn't do that. And there's no marking or numbers or anything else on it. And I say, so why have you got a First World War iron cross? He said, well, my client tells me that her father was given it here after the war. And I said, okay, who by? And he said, Adolf Hitler, the guy who ran his security detail. And I look at it and I go, and I know that Hitler only ever wore one decoration, right? Hitler didn't wear loads of medals. He wore his gold party badge and his Iron Cross First Class from World War I. Hitler was a hero. funny thing to say, Gerard, but Hitler was a hero in World War I. He won the Iron Cross second class and the Iron Cross first class. And he was recommended for both medals by his Jewish officer. Interestingly.
Ironic.
Yeah, quite. And I look at this medal and I am being told that I'm holding something that was given to Adolf Hitler's guard commander in Bariloche after the war for the services rendered to Hitler by this man. And it wasn't presented as a medal, it was given to him as a keepsake because he had kept Hitler and his family alive. Hitler gave him one of the most important things he had in his life, his Iron Cross first class. And I'm looking at it and I can't prove that. It's a wacky story, but I can't prove it.
So do you think that...
My lawyer doesn't lie. The lawyer doesn't lie. His client doesn't lie. Why would he tell me the story?
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
So do you think British intelligence and American intelligence were in touch with Hitler during this period after the war? Or were they happy to leave?
They were definitely in touch with Martin Bormann. Bormann runs a major organization which is headquartered out of Buenos Aires and Madrid. And in Madrid, Otto Scorseni runs it. And it's what has become to known as Odessa, which isn't Odessa at all. It's the Kameradenwerk, the Friends Society. The CIA hire hundreds of Nazis across the globe. Klaus Barbie in Paraguay. They hire Scorseni to do various things. They think they're running Reinhard Gehlen and his intelligence operation in West Germany, the intelligence operation of the Cold War. But this is actually all being run by Martin Bormann. And Bormann is running rings around the Americans and the Brits. Ian Fleming, by this stage, is retired. He's gone to Barbados or Jamaica and he's writing Bond novels. But he's key to... Dulles uses Fleming and his commandos to get all the scientists and all the information out of Germany at the end of the war. And he only does that because Bormann has told Dulles, who tells Ian Fleming where to go. So Fleming knows, and if Fleming knows, probably a couple of his superiors know as well. I mean, Fleming goes on to work for the people who own the Sunday Times before Murdoch after the war and runs an international operation of stringers and reporters and everything else. It's basically MI6 overseas. So yeah, British intelligence know, and when we must be getting some benefits out of it. I don't know what we're getting, but we are getting some benefits out of it.
So do you think the British Prime Ministers since World War II know that Hitler survived the war?
Yeah, without doubt.
And I mean, especially in this day and age with social media and everyone has got a lot of access to getting their opinions out there. You know, why do you think this story hasn't been picked up by major news organizations and widely embraced?
Good question. I mean, really good question. I mean, when the book was published, 10 years ago, something like that now, the Daily Mail did a piece and they used a historian called Guy Walters to review the book. And Walters said, I was 1,000% wrong in everything I wrote. Well, thanks, Guy. I mean, 100% wrong and do me, mate. I mean, I don't exaggerate. Why do you? 3 days later, Guy Walters emails my publishers in America asking them for a copy of the book. He hasn't read the damn thing. He just immediately says I'm 1,000% wrong. He then comes after me on Twitter and I leave Twitter because I think you tosser. I mean, sorry, typical English public school boy. And I just can't deal with them.
I think Guy Walters' actual quote was, I've got it here, he described the theory as 2,000% rubbish.
Oh yeah, there you go.
And he said the book's an absolute disgrace and there's no substance to it.
Yeah.
And it appeals to all the deluded fantasies of conspiracy theorists and there's no place whatsoever in historical research.
This is 3 days before Guy Walters asked for a copy from my publishers.
So why do you think someone like Guy Walters, who, I mean, I don't know a lot about him, I know the name.
He gets paid, he's a rent-a-mouth. I mean, you know, he gets paid to turn up on the Jeremy Vine show and talk about complete bollocks. He gets paid by the Daily Mail to write nonsense. He wrote a book called Hunting Evil, which basically said that Wiesenthal was a fraud. Wiesenthal is a mixed, difficult man, the Nazi hunter Simon Wiesenthal. But he definitely wasn't a fraud. But Guy Walters knows best. He's one of those privileged little Eton educated types. I think he's Harrow, not Eton. Who thinks he knows better than everybody. We have one as our prime minister at the moment.
Well, that's another story for another podcast, I think.
Don't get me started.
But I'm sure French researchers in 2018.
The teeth. We'll always come back to the teeth. These are Hitler's teeth. The French researchers won't release any of their findings to international experts. The Russians won't release the teeth for DNA testing. And if they're the same teeth as the skull that Benetoni DNA'd, they're not Hitler's. I'm damn sure that a number of his doubles were probably given dental work. I mean, when I was in Iraq, I met one of Saddam Hussein's doubles. After Gulf War II, he was looking for work. I think he was looking for work on Fox News or something, but whatever. And the guy had everything done to make him look like Saddam, and he looked exactly like Saddam.
So you think that the tests that have been done are actually just tests on Hitler's doubles?
I don't know what they test on. I'm not going to make that decision. What I'm damn sure of is they're not Hitler's teeth. I'm damn sure of that. I'll give you an example. Martin Bormann, right? He's dead in Berlin, 1945. The Germans looked for his body. It was the third time they looked in the same place where they found the body. They then dug the body up, DNA tested it, confirmed it was Martin Bormann, ground the bones into dust and threw them in the North Sea. Now, I've read the scientific report on the Bormann DNA testing. They say that they used an 83-year-old female relative, Martin Bormann's, to match it to make sure it was Martin Bormann. Martin Bormann's children, of which I think 6 are still alive, and at the time 8 were still alive, had all offered their DNA to the West German government to make sure that this was their father. The West German government refused. And when asked who this 83-year-old female relative of Martin Bormann's was, none of the kids knew. They'd never heard of Auntie Hilga. Yeah. She's never named in the German report. And the Daily Express the next day ran an article actually by the father of a good friend of mine, who's a second-generation journo I've worked with off and on over 40 years. And his dad was the Express correspondent in Berlin covering the DNA stuff. And he said, it's complete whitewash. The judge who has now signed the death warrant, not the death warrant, the death certificate for Bormann, I know he was a senior judge in the Nazi Party. I've got his number, his membership number of the Nazi Party. None of the kids say it's their dad. But no, now Martin Bormann is confirmed as dead in Berlin in 1945 by a German government DNA test.
What's the opinion of other leading journalists or senior journalists, if that's the right way of putting it, about this? I mean, do they...
My mates told me never to do it. They went, you're nuts. Don't do this. You've got a good reputation. Don't ruin it. You'll blow it completely. People will just think you're a nutter. And then I gave a number of them the book, and they went, well, God, all right. Well, this definitely throws some doubt into the situation. And the subtitle of Grey Wolf, The Escape of Adolf Hitler, is The Case Presented. That's what we do. We present the case, knock it down. So in different countries around the world, I've had people be very interested in it. Russians published some interesting stuff about me. As the FSB, the current day KGB, said, he's a nutter. So thank you guys, I'm a nutter. And yet when I spent quite a while talking to the Soviet ambassador in the Russian ambassador in Argentina, who's a former FSB colonel. And he just looked at me and went, they'll never believe you, even though it's true.
So do you believe that there are other journalists who actually believe your theory or believe some of your theory? I know
it's not a theory. I don't do theories, Kieran.
Yeah. Well, just for the sake of giving it a balance.
For the sake of balance, I don't do theories. If anybody wants to read Grey Wolf and look at the facts I present, they will see I'm not somebody who spent his time in his bedroom typing one-handed. The problem with this story, and the problem with getting to the truth of this story, is it's surrounded by myth and idiocy all around the place. Nazi UFOs on the moon, Antarctic bases, Hitler's children. I mean, there are people who just make stuff up all the time. I mean, I've just had to dispose of one fraudulent set of documents from Austria, which were just presented to me, which weren't presented to me by frauds. They'd found them. They were very, very old. And another one that turned up online about Hitler being buried in Madrid, which was a very clever 8-year-old Photoshop fraud, but very clever. And it's just taken me 6 weeks. Graphologists, people who study signatures and everything else, to dismiss these as being forgeries. Now, if I hadn't dismissed them as being forgeries, I'd have the smoking gun everybody wanted, but it wouldn't be true.
So what do you think needs to happen, or what piece of evidence do you think needs to surface, or what evidence do you think is out there that you haven't found yet that is going to prove beyond any doubt to?
I don't think anybody. People are too invested in the original Hitler's Dead story. There would be a lot of very respected historians. Well, I don't respect them. I'm sorry. They don't respect me. Fine. But, I don't respect them because they're lazy. They go back and do their research from their offices. They don't walk the ground. They don't talk to people. And they go back to peer-reviewed material like Hugh Trevor Roper's Last Days of Hitler and go, oh, this is fact. Whereas in Grey Wolf, I destroyed Trevor Roper. Or Simon and I destroyed Trevor Roper. But nobody's ever used that material and gone, well, actually, maybe Trevor Roper was lying his ass off, which he was. Because the material in it is not true. It's made up. Now, I've been accused of many things as a journalist over 40 years. Being drunk a lot of the time was one of them. And being absent, whatever, out for lunch. But I've never been accused of making anything up because I haven't. I can't see the point. I'd love to. It would be so easy. There are people out there who show pictures of Hitler after, Hitler in Argentina and say, this is Hitler in Argentina. Well, there's one of him lying with a face scarf over his face. We tracked it down. It's a shot from the 1930s of a man in a London home for the poor.
Are other journalists and people in the industry frightened to endorse your story or endorse your belief?
I don't think they care. Hitler still sells, and they're just convinced I'm in it for the money. I wish I was. It's cost me my house, my marriage, and quite a lot of other things, basically. But and I'm broke, very broke. So I don't know. I mean, there are people out there who accept it and they're embarrassed, not frightened, but embarrassed to come on board. I've got a second book, I hope. I'll find out this week if my publisher's going to pick it up. But I've got a second book which just dots the I's and crosses the T's on everything I'm saying. Partially from the Scorseni papers, but partially from released material from the CIA. They've let stuff go which somebody at a very low level didn't know what they were doing. It's amazing. I mean, there's a 56-page detailed report in 1951 on the international Nazi conspiracy. And it names places, money sources. I mean, there's a guy called Schwend out of Paraguay who's creating fake dollars and fake British fibers. And that's helping fund the new Nazi party. I mean, it's just scary.
So if anyone's listening to this podcast, or people who do listen to it and watch it on the YouTube version, they might be getting convinced by your arguments, and they might want to do a little bit of research themselves and have a look, apart from obviously buying your excellent book, which I believe is available on Amazon.
Yeah, I think still, yeah.
Yeah, so definitely get that book.
And if they find me on Facebook and they can't get that book, I don't make much out of those book sales anyway. I'll send them an e-copy. Perfectly.
Okay, well, there we are then. Excellent.
You can find me on Facebook. Spell my first name right. Yeah.
bit of evidence, or where would you send them just to convince them quickly?
Well, I mean,
of your theories.
Grey Wolf, the book, has 83 pages of notes in the back. So if you want to find out where I found out that something came from, the notes are there. If they join the Spider's Web on Facebook, they can find out a lot more material and see more material coming up every day, especially from some really good researchers in Argentina and Uruguay.
So what was that again? Sorry, Gerard?
It's called the Spider's Web on Facebook. I think, if you look for me, you'll find probably a link to the Spider's Web on my Facebook page. And that has lots of people who are contributors and not just people who look at the page, and there are a great bunch of guys in Argentina and Uruguay and Paraguay who are supplying amazing material at the moment, just amazing material. They all get credited, and it'll all be in the new book because it just ties into so much of the other stuff that, it's now, 13 years more since I wrote Grey Wolf. I did 3 series hunting Hitler, then I fell ill. I had bowel cancer, which I'd gone back to live in Wales, restart my life from France. And basically I ended up coming home to die. But not to die, thank God.
Well, we hope not quite yet, Gerard.
No. So I major op 2 years ago, and that knocked me out for a while. I've still got problems after the operation, but I'm cancer free, so I'm not going to let it define me. But it has defined my abdomen quite a lot, so cut it right open. So it's been a long route back. But if you take out I've still been working the last year and a half. If you take out some period, I've been adding more information to this for 13 years. It's explosive. And if historians don't want to believe it, I can't help that. I can't convince them. I went on a TV show in Sweden, and again, with a couple of historians, and they refused to believe me. And I said, have you read the book? And they said, no, you're a liar. And I said, okay, but you haven't read.
But do you think that reporters or historians like that, do you think they genuinely believe that Hitler died in the bunker, or is it something else going on?
No, I think they genuinely believe. I don't think they're part of some international lizard people, Illuminati blasted conspiracy. No, I think they genuinely believe it. And I think they genuinely believe it because they're incredibly lazy and haven't looked at the material that shows that the material they've been looking at is at least questionable. Kieran, I'd love it if I got proved wrong.
Yeah.
Perfectly happy. If somebody can come up with some seriously undeniable proof that swine is dead in 45 in the bunker with a bullet in his head, I'll be a happy boy. I'll go off and continue writing World War II fiction. I write World War II fiction novels because studying the Nazis is a very depressing thing. And in my novels, I get to kill them. And it's a lot more interesting, a lot more fun. But just prove me wrong, for God's sake, I don't make this stuff up.
And what was it like, just a bit of a general question, what was it like filming the Hunting Hitler series, which is still available to watch, I believe, on the Discovery Channel or similar outlets?
Yeah, non-history. It was frustrating in a lot of ways, dealing with people who had not read my book and who hadn't read widely and wanted to make it very exciting TV. But it got me to places that I hadn't been. It got me back to a lot of places I had been before, but it got me to places I hadn't been. And I got to meet Lenny DePaul, who's one of my favorite people ever, former US Marshal Manhunter, but one of the best guys in the world, and Tim Kennedy, who is basically Captain America, an American samurai. His and my politics are never going to match, but Tim is a great man, really good guy.
And a UFC fighter as well, I believe.
Yeah, and a special forces sniper with 120 kills to his name in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Yeah,
samurai.
And I suppose one thing that Hunting Hitler program has done is opened the idea up to a wider audience?
I think so. Yeah, I mean, a lot of that audience want to believe in conspiracies. So you'll get a lot of people out there who, yeah, Hitler didn't die in the bunker, little green men run our country, 9/11 didn't happen, all that stuff. I know nothing about those. Yeah, I know my subject, but I don't know anything about the others. And it's quite interesting going on some podcasts, especially in America, where they go, so what's your opinion on the JFK assassination, Gerard? I said, well, he seems to be dead, but I haven't spent 15 years doing JFK. I spent 15 years on this story.
So I guess the question what really want to know, and I guess the listeners want to know, is what really did happen to Hitler in his final days?
He died in February 1962 of complications from, well, basically a heart attack in the end. Took him out. He'd had a few nasty strokes leading up to that. Also, he had this tremor they talk about, where supposedly he had Parkinson's. He didn't. He had scarlet fever as a child, and that does problems to your nerves in later life. So it seems he was suffering from some scarlet fever problems, which meant he couldn't paint. Tough mate. He wasn't that good a painter anyway. And yeah, he died. He died from stroke heart attack. Well, that's according to the material from his personal doctor, Dr. Otto Lehmann, who left material to describe his time looking after the Führer from 1955 to 1962.
And what evidence is there to back up your story that Hitler died in Argentina as opposed to the bunker?
Well, only all the eyewitnesses who saw him in Argentina, all the material that.
No, sorry, just regards his death, just
his
the death itself.
I mean, yeah.
I mean, you were very specific on the time and date.
Yeah, I'm very convinced by the Otto Lehmann memoirs. I also have now information from one of the guards who was at Inalco, his son, and there are a couple of other things broadcast and published in Argentina which back up his death in 62. One of my Argentine reporters is pretty convinced he didn't die in La Clara, which is where I have him dying, but he died much further south. But he died in 62. But I don't know whether I'll ever be able to prove that. All I can say is that Dr. Otto Lehmann says that he died on February 3rd, 1962, and he's very detailed about it. And Lehmann's memoirs, no material, and from the time they were written, it's material that you could probably find out on the internet now, but you couldn't have found out in 1962. I mean, you'd have to have been a senior member of the Nazi Party and very close to it to know what Lehmann knew. So I found them pretty convincing. But prove me wrong. I don't know completely. I mean, I'm pretty sure. But Adolf Hitler's dead in a bunker in 45. In Argentina, he supposedly dies in a road crash in 46. That's what the people on the Estancia San Ramon are told, that the family are killed in a road crash. He then goes on to live until 1962. I have his daughter's testimony via the Argentine human rights lawyer. As I said, I've got no smoking gun, but what I have is a huge amount of smoke.
And what's your plans for the future then, Gerard, in regards to the subject? I know you mentioned you've got another book, hopefully in the pipeline, if you get the green light. Yeah,
I need to get to America, which is where the Scorseni archives are, and digitize them all, have them translated, and go through them in detail. I want to go back to South America, and there's still material to uncover in Argentina and people I'd like to interview there. I hope there's going to be some more telly, but if there is, I will be in charge of it editorially. I'm not going to go off on wacky things. I mean, I had to refuse to do quite a few things on hunting Hitler because they were just completely wrong. So they brought other people in to do them. But I wouldn't do some things because they were just wrong. And that's a small percentage of it over 3 series, but enough of it to annoy me. But you know, it's important that when I do the further telling, that I have editorial control of this, because I know this subject better than most people, sadly. God, I wish I'd studied rugby, or I wish I'd been a football fan and knew the history of Leeds United from 1912 onwards.
Is this? I get the impression that this quest, if you want to call it that, but this is a
obsession.
Obsession. It's a burden on you. It's not something you embrace, really. It's something you feel you've got to follow.
It's something I think needs to be done. As a journalist, I hate being lied to. I just hate it. I mean, I've come across liars and charlatans all over the world. I hate them. And I really do feel that this is important for people to know, or at least it's important for people to be exposed to, so they realize that they're not always told the truth by governments. The massacre in Londonderry, the Bloody Sunday massacre, is a great example of that. The parachute regiment shot a bunch of terrorists, except they didn't, and it took us 35 years to find out that the people who got killed on that day were innocent. And I'm not complaining about the paras. I've got friends who served. But what happened was a bunch of paras, young boys with automatic rifles, were put in a really difficult situation. And they're soldiers, not police. They fired. Well, we could have just said that. But no, we have to hide it, and judicial inquiries and millions of pounds spent for the truth to come out. So, governments lie to us all the time. This current government lies to us every day.
Yeah.
So is it a burden? I don't know. It's cost me personally, financially and emotionally. But
has it cost you professionally as well?
I'm too old to be a hard news journalist, really. I gave up when I was sitting in a car park in Baghdad at the Al Rashid, wearing a helmet and a flak jacket, smoking a cigarette in 33-degree heat, waiting for the car to take me along the murder mile to get me out of Baghdad. And I just thought, I'm too old for this shit. And I was 36. Everybody else around me was in their 20s and early 30s. I've done my bit. I've got the t-shirt. I don't need to prove myself to anybody. But in terms of going back to international news, in 2004, I did the tsunami. That was it. I never want to work in news again, really. So has it damaged my standing professionally? Well, we won't get any freelance shift at Sky, but maybe I don't want them. I don't know. I mean, what people think of me is what people think of me. I can't change that. I'm not looking for, I'm not looking for medals. I'm not looking to be a hero. And I do this because I think it's important. And there are times when I think nobody else thinks it's important. Why the hell are you doing this? And then you invite me onto your show, and I think, well, it's interesting, so I'll have a chat with him.
Well, no, I found it. I love history, and that's part of the reason why I decided to start this podcast, was to speak to people like yourself.
I hope I haven't rattled on too much, Kieran.
No, definitely not. I mean, I find it so interesting, and I watched all the Hunting Hitler programs.
There's the drama documentary of the Grey Wolf book is on Amazon Prime.
I've watched that as well, yeah.
And there's a free version on YouTube if you haven't got Prime viewers. And I'm perfectly happy if you watch it either way, because, again, that got nicked from me. I make no money from that film, despite having written it, directed it, produced it. Long stories. But, yeah, I mean, it's, I think it's important.
Yeah. And of course, your book is available on Amazon to buy as well. Have you got any other? How can people follow you on social media? You mentioned you're off Twitter now.
I tend to stick on Facebook. People can follow me there and come and find me there. And if you can't find the book, I'll send you an e-copy. You send me 10 quid. I'll love you forever. And yeah, Facebook's probably the best place to find me. And I do, as you know, I come back to people. Unless it's, the last one I didn't go back to was a 23-year-old black girl in Sweden who wanted to convince me she was Adolf Hitler's daughter. So I didn't really get into a conversation with her.
Okay, that's probably one well avoided.
Yeah, it's all about DNA and the master race. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you very much for your time this morning, Gerard. I really enjoyed this conversation. I found it so interesting. I know as soon as I finish this interview now, I'm going to get straight on the computer and start doing some of my own research based on this conversation, because these are questions I wanted to ask you since I started watching the Hunting Hitler show.
Well, thanks for having me, Kieran. It's been fun.
No, I've really enjoyed it. So if people watching, you can, as I mentioned at the top of the interview, you can follow us on Twitter at STTP Uncut. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel and like our Facebook page. You can contact Gerard, as he mentioned, on Facebook, and you can buy his book via Amazon, or you can contact him direct, and he can send you a copy for the exchange of a mere £10.
Or less. I'm not bothered. Everything helps. Everything helps.
And hopefully, Gerard, you get your next book deal, because I think that story definitely needs to get out there. And I hope you, a TV producer or TV channel picks up your story and the rest.
I think they will. I mean, COVID's been a bit of a hit for everybody. Loads of my mates haven't worked any more than I have this year. So but TV will come back. It's just going to take a little time. Okay,
so once again, thanks very much for your time, Gerard. Hopefully I'll meet you in person sometime. Yeah, Croeso. And
send me a link, I'll pop it up on the page.
Yeah, thanks so much, Gerard. Cheers, mate. Thank you.
Take care.
You're listening to Straight to the Point Uncut.